Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi and welcome back to a special guest episode of That Trippi Show with Alex Ashlow. As you know, we've been exploring not just how and why Trump won, but what we as a country need to do about it. This week, we're really excited to have Katherine Stewart back on. Katherine understands the MAGA movement better than most people. She's been researching it for the better part of 15 years. Her new book, Money, Lies, and God, Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy, is out now, and it is a must-read. Think of it as a long-form answer to how and why did MAGA pull this off. Let's get into it. Katherine, welcome.
Great to be here again. Great to talk to you guys.
Alex, where do you want to get started, my friend?
We have so much to get into today, and we're really excited to talk to Katherine about the book because it's really important what's in there in terms of just the, like you said, Joe, the how and the why. But one thing that we were talking about pre-show that I really wanted to start with is this idea, and Joe, you've brought it up on the podcast before, the idea that the kind of default condition of humanity is not democracy. Right. It's actually kind of hard to it takes a lot of work to have a stable functioning democracy. And I know Katherine gets into that in her book, but Joe, why don't you start there with that kind of thesis? And then Katherine, I want to hear what you saw for researching your book plays into that.
Well, I mean, look, this is something that we've talked about before on the show, but most time humanity's been around. It's been kings, dictators, strongmen. That's the default position. The unusual thing is democracy. People who can compromise, work as a community, solve problems, and understand that not everybody is going to get 100% of what they want or get their way, but that we've got common purpose. And anyway, that has been we've been living the unusual thing. I mean, everybody says, it talks about normalcy and, what's normal. Well, democracy is not just the normal thing. It's a special thing. It's hard to keep it together. And again, as all the other things we've tried haven't worked as well as democracy has, and hopefully we can keep it. But that's why I'm so happy to have Katherine on.
Thank you so much. That's really insightful, Joe. And, I've been researching this movement now for about 16 years. This movement is really intent on destroying democracy. They told us that they were going to smash the institutions of democracy. They told us exactly what they were going to do, and they're doing it now. I think many Americans over time have really chosen not to believe what they were saying. And now I wonder, are we going to believe what we're actually seeing unfold before our eyes? I titled the book Money, Lies, and God because first, money is a huge part of the story, meaning that enormous concentrations of wealth have really destabilized our political system in some really critical ways. Second, lies or conscious disinformation is another really huge feature of the anti-democratic movement. And number three, God, because the most important ideological framework for the largest part of this movement is Christian nationalism.
But you also pointed out that the networks that they created. I mean, I think that this is something that Alex and I have been talking about. We did not understand the insidious nature of the networks that they were building and over decades. Everything from media networks like Fox and Breitbart and now with X, and the networks within Christian nationalism. I mean, just that almost is I think the most powerful thing that they were able to build because it all happened while we weren't really, it was right in front of our eyes. I still think there's a lot of people in the Democratic Party don't really and on the pro-democracy movement that don't really understand the power of the networks that they built and with the financing to do it too. And we'll get into that because I have some other questions and things I want to bounce off of you.
Absolutely. I mean, even before Trump was elected in 2016, it was clear that the movement was gaining considerable political power and advancing its agenda through the courts in particular. But, the movement's strength is in this deeply networked infrastructure. And, my 3 books in this field explore that infrastructure and its funding and leadership. We really need to understand the movement and how it intends to use its power. This is a movement that's both leadership driven and organization driven. And the strength of this movement is in this densely connected, interconnected infrastructure. So the organizations can be grouped into categories. There's a vast right-wing sort of legal ecosphere. There are policy groups. There are legal advocacy groups. There are think tanks. You have networking organizations that get different sectors of the leadership on the same page and bring them together with really deep-pocketed funders. You have like vast information or disinformation, I should say, and propaganda organizations and initiatives that reach down to the rank and file and sort of put them in a state often of sort of fear and unreality, sort of separating them from the facts. And, I've been going for the past, 15 or 16 years to right-wing conferences and strategy gatherings. And there, the movement leaders are frankly really open about their plans. They tell us what they want to do. And unfortunately, there is some really terrific reporting on this movement out there, but it tends to get ghettoized or sidelined and rarely gets integrated into the mainstream media. The problem has always been that, not that they're hiding, but that people really aren't paying attention. They're not listening. And what they're after is effectively an end to democracy. They've been saying it for years. I mean, the movement, broadly speaking, right now controls all three branches of the federal government, along with some state governments. It's also part of a global anti-democratic movement that's ascendant around the world. So if you're concerned about long-term economic prosperity, about equality and pluralism, about the rule of law, about corruption and kleptocracy, about the environment, about the future of education, really about the preservation of any of our democratic norms and institutions and the integrity of our overseas alliances, you really need to know something about this movement and its people.
The difference between how they saw and invested their money and how Democrats are pro-democracy. We've talked about this, Alex and I, about like they own things, we rent things. Unfortunately, it's a joke, but it's true. And I know in the book you talk about how they actually invested in the movement and in the networks while the left invests in politicians. And, they invested in their networks, we invested in politicians. And when the politician loses or the campaign's over, all that money disappears. It really didn't build a whole lot, whereas they keep building and keep building and keep investing. So if you could get into that a little bit, I think our listeners need to understand that.
That's so true. I mean, the reporting in the run-up to the 2024 election often frustrated me because people would say, Trump doesn't have money, the Republican Party doesn't have enough money to really pull this off. And I think he doesn't need money. He's got all these outside organizations that are doing the work on his behalf. I mean, I think this is a movement that for many years, the Republican Party thought, well, we can make use of this because it delivers a really reliable slice of voters. But what's happening now is that the movement itself is controlling the party. The guardrails have really fallen away and extremists have really, frankly, taken over. I mean, they're really extreme in their ideologies and money lies in God. I focus on both sides of the new American authoritarianism, religious nationalism, and a movement called the New Right. And if you dig into the ideologies of both of the sides of this movement, kind of the power couple of the new American authoritarianism, that have made a kind of marriage of convenience. There's some overlap, but there's some real differences. The ideologies are really extreme. So yeah, the fact is that the right has been so much smarter about their funding, and there's like just tremendous resources on the right. I mean, think about Barry's side. By the way, the funders are all over the place religiously. They're not all Protestant or evangelical. They're not even all Christian. I mean, think about Barry's side, a Jewish Chicago billionaire who donated $1.6 billion to create the Marble Freedom Trust. He put Leonard Leo in charge of it. Leo is an ultra-conservative Catholic fellow who sort of concluded years ago that the policies he wanted would never be approved by the voters. So he thought, if I can take the courts, we can take the country. And he built up the sort of far-right legal ecosphere. Think about the Corkeries. They're very conservative Catholic funders of the movement. Then you've got like the DeVos Prince family juggernaut. You've got people like the Wilkes brothers and Tim Dunn, who are on the evangelical side. who really do believe in those culture war issues. But the funders they really want economic policies that are going to benefit their pocketbooks. You think Barry Side really cares about same-sex marriage? I mean, we don't know because he doesn't speak, but I don't think that's really what's motivating him. But, there is money on the Democratic side, to be sure, but often people will fund individual politicians, and if they lose their election, the money goes away. Sometimes, frankly, they don't need that huge war chest, right? And then sometimes the money goes toward these technocratic solutions or organizations that are working in silo. But the anti-democratic movement has been so much better at building first of all, I think this funding is vastly superior. The amounts, I mean, even Marble Freedom Trust from Barry Side, they can spend $230 million a year alone without touching the nut. I mean, that's an extraordinary figure. So I think they've got more money on it. And I also think that they spend their money in a smarter way. They're building infrastructure. So, if you've got one leader of an organization who falls out, he gets caught up in some scandal, which has happened famously on a few recent occasions, there's others to take their place. Somebody else can lead the organization, or there are other organizations that can kind of, fill in the gap. And they work very closely together.
I don't want to spoil one of your conclusions, and I want to get to some of the broader points you make, but one of the things that again goes back to a lot of what Joe and I have been trying to uncover the last couple months is one of your conclusions, just a quote from your book. I'm going to read, and this is a very visual medium, so I'm just going to read a quote from your book to you. But the most important lesson I draw from observing the anti-democratic reaction to date is that its success has largely been an organizational one. Victory did not come from better ideas. It has been the result of a massive, decades-long, far-sighted investment in the people and infrastructure of an anti-democratic shadow party. And I kind of think we could just chant that for 30 minutes and still not get that point across more strongly enough. Because it does seem like the reaction on the Democratic side is always the next great candidate, the next great politician that we can try to get back. I mean, Joe, I'll let you weigh in, but the one thing I just wanted to point out before you got on was we were talking, if, for example, if we had held Trump off in 2024, how much of that would have just been kind of papering over some of these cracks because that movement isn't going away? But go ahead, Joe.
We've talked about this. They know, because they're a movement, they know if they don't do it this time, they'll get us next time, because we'll keep the guardrails of democracy wide open for them to use those tools and manipulate them and bend them to their means. And that's why it's, when we talk about the default position, we're talking about the default position being kings, authoritarians, dictators, and the one that's the toughest thing to keep going is democracy. They view destroying democracy as a movement to get what they want, their power, their economic policies and to inflict that on the rest of us. We view it as just another campaign. Democracy has to be a movement. There has to be a pro-democracy movement in this country. And I want to get into, your solution. I mean, because I do think one of the things about the book is it does offer some optimism on how to crack what they've built. And so, but I do think at the foundational level, we've got to change our thinking and start to see this as, to keep democracy alive, it has to be a movement of citizens from the ground up that actually, and the party and the pro-democracy side has to understand that it's a fight. And it's a counter movement to their authoritarian and very well financed. I mean, I remember when at the end of the Dean campaign, I sort of talked about Jefferson's revenge would be hundreds and millions of Americans giving small dollars, and that would be this powerful thing that would take out all the big money. And then, of course, Citizens United happened, and because they realized that you have to change the rules to make sure that all this, and Leo Leonard and all that stuff, and the money was so big on the other side that now it drowns out the $10 people, the $15 people that give, hundreds of millions, but not nearly enough to fight particularly if it's spent on a politician.
Absolutely. This creating a movement is really what we need to do. We need to spend money smarter. We need to think about organizations and people. The right, again, invest money in organizations and people. It lets people know that they can build their futures within this movement. It finds talent and it sort of nurtures it. And we need to do very much the same. I mean, there's so many things that we can do. I have a sort of prescriptive list toward the end of the book, and I don't have time to get into all of it. But I think it's really important right now that we sort of don't curl up, like get out of bed, right? First of all, I mean, the attacks are having real consequences on real people, federal employees. And we need to become champions of the people this movement is going to harm. I think, again, we need to engage in our democracy in really meaningful ways. We have elections in 2 and 4 years. We need to get out our base. We need to go after low propensity voters, and we need to start now. I mean, when I was recently at America Fest, it's and sort of the hardcore of the MAGA movement, they drew 20,000 people to Phoenix, Arizona in December, and I went. I remember, Steve Bannon said, when you lost in 2020, you didn't get into bed and suck your thumbs. You got out there and you committed to fight. And it's like, he's true. I mean, think about it. America didn't go MAGA. Trump lost by a proportionally really small margin. If you look at how presidents win elections, what percentage they win by, his margin was really quite small. There was just a depressed kind of enthusiasm on the Democratic side. And one lady was saying, don't start campaigning in September if the election is in November. Start campaigning in March, but don't campaign. Hold a barbecue, in your community and only invite Republicans and just get to know people. You create relationships, and that's what's really persuasive. That kind of thing, sort of trusted voices in the community. A really important point, I think, is that we need to abandon purity tests. We need a big tent. We're not going to agree on everything, nor should we, frankly, in a country as large and diverse as ours. It's like being in a big family. You might want a pony, but you're not going to get one, right? But if we can agree on some of the core values, the values of equality and pluralism and democracy, we can and should work together. We should be able to build those bridges. It's, as they call it at their meeting, the 80% friend. They sort of paraphrase Ronald Reagan. They say, Ronald Reagan said, if someone agrees with you 80% of the time, that's your 80% friend, not your 20% enemy. We need to think in those same ways. Also, we really need to start pushing policies that involve real change. So to give one example, housing is completely unaffordable in the United States. It's super complicated, but we have a system that doesn't make it easy. I mean, this is just one kind of example. We need to start addressing issues that will sort of take the teeth out of some of the resentments of the rank and file. Those resentments, those economic resentments, and frankly, the movement is also really good at tapping into maybe unexamined prejudices, but the resentments really make it easy for these folks it makes it easy for them to become susceptible to disinformation because they're angry and they don't know why. And this is a movement that says, it's those people over there that you should be blaming. And they're like, oh yeah, look at that thing that's happening. And often it's disinformation. We're also going to have to deal in some way, like if we can deal with the sort of fact that our country now is flooded with disinformation and conspiracism. You have QAnon believers, or at least QAnon pushers at the very top. It's really kind of disgraceful. So we need to deal with that. I think that it's very hard to address sort of the issues of separation of church and state, because as soon as you open your mouth about it, you get accused by the other side of being anti-Christian. Nothing could be further from the truth. Some of the most powerful voices in opposition to this movement are themselves pastors and Christians. The movement leaders will call social gospel heresy. Actually, I heard that, at the America Fest. But many other pastors will say, well, that is the gospel, So, but we need to be willing to be called names. They're calling us names already. Sort of to insist on this key constitutional principle that is really one of the pillars of a modern constitutional democracy. The main thing is that, we shouldn't be discouraged. We should take hope from so many Americans who've preceded us who have fought for the key principles of this country, even when conditions were, I mean, think about, I take courage from the words of my friend, the Reverend Kelly Brown Douglas, whose ancestors were enslaved, and they fought for freedom. They fought for freedom even though they'd never see it for themselves. They fought for people they would never even see, that they would never know. We may be in a generational struggle, but it's other people have done it in the past, and we have benefited so much from their efforts. And this is a struggle that we too should take on.
Yeah, I can't remember where the quote is, but when old men plant trees in the shade of which they know they will never sit. That's the hope that we all need to be part of. And something else you point out is that they're divided and we are still a majority. I think that's really important for people to understand that it is a fragile coalition. I know they're tightly united. I don't mean it that way, but they aren't necessarily, yeah, and how do we sort of wedge that, or is that possible in your view?
But they don't all believe the same things. Yeah. Which I know, Katherine, you get into.
The biggest crack is in the divergence of economic interests. The MAGA base is looking for a better deal for workers, a better deal for the middle classes, but the funders are really looking to turn the screws on workers and the middle classes. They want to fatten their pocketbooks at the workers and middle classes' expense. So those kinds of divisions can be highlighted, and they should be. The elites within the movement are also, I would say, generally more accommodating of religious and sexual diversity, whereas the base is less so because of the sort of religious nationalism, the identity politics that they've been spoon-fed. But then there's also a schism between the leaders of the theocratic wing, who want to put government in every bedroom, right? And leaders of the so-called libertarian wing, who really seem to want to put AI in every bedroom. So there are a number of other fissures that I describe in Money, Lies, and God, and these fissures can be highlighted, and they should be.
Before we cut out, Alex and I were talking before, and what's the new right? Now they're in government. And how do you see that? How's that play out? How do they, I mean, obviously they've had the playbook, it's been written. They know exactly what they want to do. Can you get into this sort of the new right movement and now where it goes once it's in government, once it has that power in its hands? That we're starting to see only like a couple of weeks in how totally, I'd say, un-American, undemocratic it is. But what sustains them in government? How do they move forward?
Thanks for the question. The new right aren't quite what you'd call Christian nationalists. Some, frankly, seem really nihilistic and draw inspiration from political theorists associated with the Nazis. I kid you not. I mean, many of them admire Carl Schmitt, who was a Nazi political theorist who came up with this idea that you're in a state of absolute emergency because of sort of the other, who the new right people might think of as like the woke or the DEI crowd. And therefore, that justifies smashing the administrative state, which is really the institutions of democracy. It's really a justification for destroying democracy in favor of what they sometimes call a red Caesar, like a sort of a monarchical, dictatorial ruler. So for them, really, it's about power. Even though they criticize the liberal elite, they're becoming a new elite. That's what their aim is. And they also play a really crucial role in bringing funders of the movement together with the kind of foot soldiers of the Christian nationalist movement. So you have a number of new right thinkers who have been associated with think tanks like the Claremont Institute or Heritage Foundation who are coming in, and they're just destroying. I mean, it's such an interesting movement because a lot of it is so performative. It's all about grand gestures and look at me explosions. Because, again, destruction is so much easier to destroy something than to create something. I mean, who cares about the morning after? They leave those little details for like the dumb bureaucrats. They're the ones who are going to think about that. But look at us. We're these sort of powerful ubermen who are going to just sort of smash things up. It's deeply nihilistic. And we're seeing this again play out in front of our eyes today.
So I think Alex asked this earlier, but how do you tell everyone who just had to deal with democracy is on the line and lost that it can be on the line again? Because it is, and much worse than I think we all believe. Do you have like any outgoing hopeful thing that we can that we should all be thinking about as we move forward and see the horror show that you just described that they're doing right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's no magic bullet. This is going to be a struggle that's going to take some time, but hope is in the struggle. I think as Stacey Abrams said, I'm not an optimist, I'm not a pessimist, but I am determined. And that is where you get your hope in that determination.
That's great. I do think, that the movement is getting its legs. I think, obviously it was a stunner in terms of the gut punch, but I think, and I don't mean from leadership. I'm talking about from people. You're starting to see, I think, a real reaction to what's happening, and so I think that determination and the determination of all of us to step up, to build a movement, to get others to join us, and to form a community of trust, because that's actually what the real destructive thing here is, to destroy trust in institutions, in government, in each other. And I think that's where we need to go. So, thanks, Katherine, for coming on. And thanks, everyone, for listening to That Trippi Show. Katherine's book, Money, Lies, and God, Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy, is out now, available wherever you get your books. We'll include a link in the show notes. And I just want to put in a plug for Says Us, because that's one of the things that we have talked about. We have to build our own networks. We have to own our networks and not rent on, buying ads on Sinclair Broadcasting or trying to change the propaganda minds on X. And so Says Us, SEZ.us, it's live. It's in the app stores now, both Android and Apple. And so download the app, join us at says.us, SEZ.us. This podcast will always be free and is part of Resolute Square. Check out the latest at resolutesquare.com/Trippi. Please subscribe to That Trippi Show and leave a review on Apple or wherever you listen. And if you are listening to this episode on YouTube, please like and subscribe to get alerts when we post the next one. You can always send us a question to thattrippyshow@gmail.com or leave us a question in a review on iTunes. We'll see you next week. Thanks again, Katherine, for being with us today.
Resolute Square.